Ladies and gentlemen, Hebrews and Shebrews, welcome to the Life Podcast, where we inspire you to thrive as peculiar people in a modern world. And today we're doing that by talking to Rico Cortes. We're going to talk to him. This is the first time I've spoken to him since the way, actually. Interviewed him. And we're going to talk to him all about his life, his testimony, coming into Torah, his baseball career, and why he started studying about the temple, his thoughts on a future temple.
If you've ever wondered why Luke is so smiley, it's not just because he loves God, it's also because he is highly caffeinated. I'm just kidding. We're very serious about coffee in our house, you guys, and Shepherd's Crook Coffee is our new favorite. This company is Torah observant and it's family owned, and they're committed to responsibly sourcing these beans that are all farmed cleanly. No pesticides, no icky stuff. Even though there's not an organic certification on the label, the owners have made sure that every place where they're sourcing beans from these small farms are growing the beans in a clean way that does not use icky chemicals, which we love. Also, the price point is beautiful, especially compared to something like Death Wish organic coffee in the store that has that creepy skull on it. You don't have to worry about a creepy skull. You can actually have the bag out at your Shabbat and not scare all the children. Shepherd's Crook Coffee tastes delicious. I love it. And they have a subscription service so that you never run out. They can deliver freshly roasted beans to your house once every 2 weeks or once a month or at whatever frequency you decide. Plus, once you find the roasts that you like, you can order in bulk. So you can get great big bags and you can have tons of coffee for all of your late night Shabbat Bible study midrashes. I know you guys are staying up late. So go to shepherdscrookcoffee.com and use code THELIFE for 25% off of your first order.
So without further ado, I give you Rico. Rico, welcome to the Life Podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's been a while since I've seen you in person. I've been enjoying your podcast. I come across them once in a while on the internet, so I'm glad you're doing well.
Hey, thank you. Yes, it was a while ago when we were filming The Way in, I think, San Diego or somewhere in California when I saw you.
It was a while back. Actually, I caught up with you again because I was in Honduras this past weekend, and I saw Mike over there.
Yeah.
And he mentioned you. I said, wow, I know Luke. And we connected, so it's good. It's Sutcliffe, Mike Sutcliffe. So I want to give him credit because he connected me directly with you, and we figured it out right away. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
He's a connector. He's one of one of those guys.
Yeah,
he knows.
I met him for the first time this weekend, and we hit it off right away. I really enjoy he's got a good heart, man. That's good people.
I agree. Well, all right. I know a lot of people will already know you who watch the show, but anyone who doesn't know you,
Yeah.
I know they want to know your testimony and your life story. So can you tell us about it?
Sure.
Tell us maybe how you got saved and how you came into the Torah and understanding of the law still matters.
Well, as you know, I've been doing this for over almost 3 decades now. And I think I'm one of the old guards still hanging around. And I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. I lived in Puerto Rico until I was 13 years old. Then I moved to California. My mom was there. I went with my mom, and then my father soon followed after. And we settled in California. In 1988, I was signed by the New York Yankees on a minor league contract. So then I went to Florida, and I stayed in Florida. Then I was previously married before Torah, and I have a son. He's 34 years old now. And then I moved to Venezuela for 6 years to scout baseball over there, Then I came back to the States. Unfortunately, due to the lifestyle you live in the world, I was no longer married, so I was single when I came into Torah. I started going to church in the middle of 98. And by 99, I was already, following and reading about the Torah. So then I began to study. And at that time, there were a lot more teachers traveling and teaching. So I got hooked up with certain teachers in the movement, and I was able to learn. And then the Lord opened the doors for me to go internationally. So I've been doing this for a while. God has been good, man. I mean, as a baseball player, my whole objective was to make a name for myself and to try to be famous, and it's all about you. And then you realize that the world can only give you so much. I never made it to the big leagues, but I was able to play with a lot of guys who are in the Hall of Fame today, and I competed and I did well. But when I came back to the Lord, I really have nothing to give Him. I have really nothing good to offer. I gave it all to the world, and God gave me an opportunity. He restored my life. He taught me, and I had a request. Interesting. Look, that when I came back to the Lord, because I grew up in a church since I was 13 years old. I gave my life to the Creator, and I accepted the Messiah, Yeshua, as my Messiah. And I was really interested my whole life. I've always liked the book of Leviticus, believe it or not, but I never really understood it. But I had a desire to learn about God. But in the system of religion, the moment I began to ask questions, some things they were saying was not lining up with what I was reading. And I was like 15 and 16, but I could read. And when I began to ask questions, trying to understand, I was marginalized. And they put me to the side. And I got to be honest with you, I was miserable in that system. So baseball became my identity. I didn't really stop serving God, but I didn't really want to go back to that particular denomination because I had no voice. By the time I was 18, 19 years old, when I went out to college, I slowly went into the world. So I never lost the fear of God, but I was not serving God, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
And then it
definitely.
wasn't until all those 12 years of running around and, you know, living in the world, seeking after my own fame. And I was a home shopping network host for a little bit, short time in Spanish. And that really helped me prepare for what I'm doing now, really. So I think even though I was not serving God, He utilized where I was to redirect me so that I'll be able to do and use those skills to do what I'm doing now. For example, my Spanish, due to the fact that I really wanted to learn English, it became like Spanglish. A few words in Spanish, no fluidity to my Spanish at that time. So I moved to Venezuela and I worked there. So I was forced to relearn the language. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then when I started doing TV for a little bit, I had to learn how to deal with camera angles, things like that. So you learn. I look at the whole thing now. God, although I was not living according to His standards, if He has a plan in your life, He will redirect all your gifts that you gave unto the world. Now you redirect it for His honor and for His kingdom. And I think, looking at the whole life that I've led, God is faithful and He's good, and I'm He's been too good to me and my family, and I'm forever grateful for that.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful. What when you kind of started pursuing him closer again when you were older, what was there something that struck the match for that? W-
Yes, there was something that happened in my personal life that kind of broke me,
Mhm.
and that's when I realized that if I don't change, you don't know how far you can go. But one of the things that happened in my life when I came back to the Lord is that I have purpose. I knew I had purpose. I didn't know where I fit in His kingdom, but I knew I had purpose. Ever since I was a kid, I felt that I had purpose. And I thought it was in the entertainment business or in baseball, whatever. And I had the gift to play baseball so far, and looking at it now, I'm glad I never made it to the big leagues. I mean, I had the skills, but it was by the grace of God that I never made it. And you may say, really, that you feel that you're glad you never made it? Looking at the life of some of my friends that I came up with, how they live now with money and no peace. Let me have the life that I have with peace on the Lord, and purpose in His kingdom. So when I came back to the Lord, I began to search after Him, not to be part of a religious system, but I really wanted to know truth. And that was my prayer. I began to use the biblical models of people who made mistakes, but yet God have mercy. And then I began to pray. I looked for biblical prayers that I could pray back to the Lord because I didn't have the words. I felt shame. I felt that I had no right to even talk to the King of the universe. And in doing so, I began to request for the Lord to show me his ways. And that was a prayer even to this day, to show me his ways, that I may find favor in his sight, based on the prayer that Moses made to the Lord on Mount Sinai. Show me your ways, that I may find favor. And I was just praying that because I didn't know what else to do, what else to say. And I do remember when I said, Lord, I want to make a difference. I'm trying to rectify my life. Allow me to do something that could bring restoration to someone's life, in this case through the word and whatever, to live longer for you than I did for the world. And I was 31 years old when I came back to God. So it's like I have a lot of work, a lot of time to make up. And I asked him, I requested, allow me to live longer for you, to teach about you, about his kingdom. And the hardest part for an athlete or a former athlete is to remove yourself and your ego and allow God to work through you. And that was true back 27 years ago, and it is true today. The more we study, the more we think we know, when in reality, none of us know anything. And that's the biggest lesson I'm learning, that I'm challenging myself to become a better servant. And sometimes we lose sight of that. We want to be know-it-alls, when in fact, we all have a piece of the pie that God wants us to be part of, but we don't know our roles. And sometimes we get kind of messed up in trying to understand God's purpose, but you never really understood your role. So that's why you don't know his purpose. And everyone has a part in God's kingdom. I'm just trying to find my niche. And that's why I study the temple, ancient Near East. I'm focusing on areas that would allow to complement some of the other people and their understanding of the Bible. Hopefully that'll be a blessing to many.
If you're still doing your taxes and you're not already going to GoshenTaxAndConsulting.com in order to get your finances from last year in order, then I don't know what to say to you, other than why not allow Kyle Smith, the CPA, and his team help you get more money back on your taxes this year and save you time and stress and headache. Just give it to the man. Give it to the man so that he can sort this out for you, so you don't have to stress out about it. And then once you've done that, you could go back to GoshenTaxAndConsulting.com and go to the consultancy aspect of the business. And if you have any kind of online thing that you're selling or trying to promote, whether it's a ministry or you're selling coffee like Shepherd's Crook Coffee, these people can help you improve your online presence in multifold. They do photography even. They do website design, and they do marketing. So they'll help get you in front of more people. Look, they're in front of you right now. So if they can sneak their way in front of you, then why can't they help you sneak your way in front of others? Go to GoshenTaxAndConsultingLLC.com and put in code THELIFE to get 10% off either of these services. I think it already has been. And you studied so much and so hard and so deeply on a lot of these subjects. I wonder if any of that inspired by the way that you were treated when you first asked questions as a kid, because you mentioned like you were brushed to the side a little. And can you also talk about that event? What happened? What did you ask? And why were they so flippant with?
When you're young, as you know, when we're younger, I'm only 59, so so when you're younger, sometimes you don't measure how you say and what to say. I remember distinctively one time I was like 15 years old. The pastor was teaching about something. It was something against Israel, as a matter of fact. And I basically went to him and said, you're talking about this way about Israel, but the Bible doesn't say that. And, when you are bold like that and you're a young guy, you don't know how to measure with the proper way of saying stuff. And sometimes even as an old man now, I'm still dealing with how do I present the information to edify you, not to, criminalize anybody, beat you down with the Bible. But the fact that I was willing to ask questions and not blindly submit to things that didn't make any sense, in and by itself basically become a threat, because now you're learning. And I noticed that in the systems of religion, when someone is not studying an area and you're confronted that something can be brought to you that is true, biblically, contextually, historically, archaeologically, and it challenges your foundation. Normally, people by and large respond two ways. They willingly accept the fact that they don't know, or they fight you to the end on what they think they know. And that's really what happens. And the reason why I want to study, believe it or not, is not because I want to be smart. It's because I don't want to feel like I felt when I was 15 years old, depending on people to tell me when I was researching myself. And I also learned another great lesson: never minimize my audience. I never make them feel like all questions are stupid, because they're not. So it was a twofold type of learning experience. I don't like to feel that way. So whatever I have that I can show, I'll share it with you. If you ask me a question, and if I don't know, I tell you. And if you ask me a question in which something that I said or a comment that I'm wrong in something, you can validate it biblically, and you do it with respect also to me, I don't mind changing it, because ultimately we are all servants of God, and our duty is to serve the King. It's not to, build our own kingdoms. And I think that's the event that kind of triggered. And I remember, it's interesting because I was a baseball scout for the White Sox, and I still remember this. This was somewhere around 95. I was scouting for the White Sox. I scouted for 10 years, from 94 to 2004. And I remember visiting my father, and he was watching TV. My father was a very God-fearing man. He was still a Christian at that time, and that was before I came into Torah. And I remember that he would pray for me all the time. But when you're in the world, you don't want your father bothering you with biblical stuff, And he he was watching a mainstream mega preacher, and I walked by in front of the TV, and my father says, I can't wait to someday see you doing that. Because you see, what people don't realize, when I was younger, I was in a church system. There was 2 times in my life, my father witnessed them, that people stood up and says that I will go to the nations, that I have purpose. That's really what saved me in the world. I was 14 years old, and then later on when I was 16 years old. And when that happened, my father always reminded me, remember, you got purpose. You go into the nations. So when I walked in front of the TV, it was actually a mega preacher preaching in a stadium. And my father says, hey, come and watch this with me. And, and look what he's doing, or whatever. And I turn around without thinking, and I said to my father, I'm not serving God. I'm in the world scouting, pursuing my own thing. And I said, no, Bobby, when I come back, I'm not going to be like that. And he looked at me, he goes, you coming back? It was like, I just said it because it came out. It's not like I didn't want to serve God. I just didn't want the regular thing. I wanted to know truth. I wanted to know God. I don't want religion. And he got all excited. And I'm going like, yo, hold on a little bit there. So, I'm not coming back today. But I remember the day that I repented. I remember the day and the hour and where I was. It was 3:00 in Tampa, Florida. It was rainy day when I called my father. And I said to him in 1990, at the end of 1990, somewhere in 98, can't remember exactly. It was the spring because it was baseball season. I know that much. I called my dad and I said, I'm coming home. And my father knew that I wasn't saying I'm going to Puerto Rico, because he was living in Puerto Rico at the time. And my father, on the other side of the phone, began to cry and call out to God and thank him, because I'm coming home. So the prayers of a father and a mother praying for your children when they're moving away from God, be faithful, be loyal to God, and don't stop doubting the Lord, because if you're implanting in them those values and principles of the fear of the Lord, those young kids may be going for a little bit, but they will come back. Now, when I came back, I had to deal with the consequences of my actions. God doesn't just, he forgives you and he pardons you, but you still have to deal with you. And that was my challenge the first few years. I need to now realize that I was the problem. I was blaming the church system, but in reality, it was me. Instead of continue to search, I gave up and I let others minimize me. and I let others marginalize me when God never did that. So when I came back to the Lord, I began to ask questions. And the King of the universe did not do what those leaders in the church did. The God of the universe allowed me to have a window and opportunities to receive the answers to the questions I was asking. Even though I had nothing to offer, the God that I serve was willing to accept me as I was. When I recognized my problems, I began to change, and he never abandoned me. He began to a request that I had. He answered. To this day, I'm a product of that mercy and that grace. And this is the reason why I'm passionate about God, because I'm just grateful that he never rejected me when others did. So that's my testimony at a glance.
Wow. Wow. That's beautiful. And
Yeah.
so then you came back into the fold. Your dad's excited. How did you get into making this your profession and learning and teaching people?
Man, that's actually quite interesting. Okay, so I'm always looking 10 years ahead. I've always had a short-term plan and a long-term plan. I'm going to be 60 in April, and I'm already have a 10-year plan of what I want to do in my personal life and my spiritual walk and whatever, because that's a way of maintaining myself motivated to do different things. Well, based on my experience in the past, I began to ask the Lord to show me. So I began to study. And I started reading basic stuff, and I began to search and ask and look. So it's interesting because I just requested God to show me his ways. So in one of my baseball, it was a spring because it's baseball season. That's how I used to remember my events back in the day. I was supposed to go on a long weekend scouting trip to Orlando. I was not doing Torah at the time. Okay, so this is a very interesting story, but I was going through a very interesting stage in my walk. I removed myself from everything for a year and a half. I was single at the time. I removed myself from everything. My job was I wake up, study, go to work, come back, go to church, come home, go to sleep, wake up, study, go to work. That's it. I didn't do anything with anybody. I didn't go anywhere, hang out with nobody for about a year and a half because I wanted to learn to have a relationship with God. I couldn't be distracted. In doing so, my job became a little bit of a burden because I just wanted to study, but I have to do my work. So in one of my trips to Orlando, I was supposed to be teaching, scouting there Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I was not a Torah follower at the time, but I kept asking God to show me his ways. So I couldn't go. I couldn't go anywhere. Basically, I got to the hotel and I spent the whole weekend just studying and praying, praying. And I woke up on Sunday morning and I didn't want to go to the church. I was in Orlando. I was living in Tampa. And I was supposed to watch a baseball game that afternoon in a college game in, I think it was Bethune-Cookman, somewhere in the East Coast. I woke up in the morning and I felt in my heart, I felt impressed, believe it or not, to go to the church. Whatever. I used to do security for the pastor back in the day. I was security for, you know who Paula White is and Randy White?
I think so, yeah.
I
yeah.
belonged to their church back in the day in Tampa when they have almost 10,000 people. Thank you, Lord, for delivering me. Anyway, let's move on. So when I walk into the office, because I did security, so I got there early, I look at the pastor. Hey, pastor, how you doing? And remember, I've been praying for truth. Show me your ways. I'm just like a little kid praying all the time for the Lord to show me his ways. And I go into the office of the pastor, and the secretary is there. And on top of the secretary's desk, there's a blue book. Okay, I opened it, and it's the Chumash, it's the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses, the Art Scroll edition. I open it, and it's as if those letters jumped out at me. And then I said, "What is this?" And then immediately when I saw the letters, I said, instinctively, I said, "This is it. This is it." But I didn't know what I was looking at. Okay, Now she told me, well, that's a gift to the pastor, but he doesn't want it. Interesting, right? They brought a gift to the pastor. He didn't want it. So I saw the book. I took the name. I went and bought it. Immediately, I went to Barnes & Nobles. You know how old I am because they don't really have Barnes & Nobles anymore. So I bought it. And on that day, I began to study from Genesis all the way to the end. All I did was go through Genesis. I was like a little kid, just reading every text, reading every commentary, reading every text all the way through. And really quickly, I realized that what they were teaching in the church was completely against what I'm reading. And that really awakened within me the desire to know more. I'm thinking, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. So it was organically, me reading, understanding. The Lord was showing me, oh, you want to know me. And eventually that led me to seek out. Then I met a guy who was going to the same church. Now, this is how amazing the Lord works, right? It's a guy at that church. His name was Tony Puleo. He's no longer alive, but he was a blessing in my life. But he was doing business in that church, and they let him take the fall from a corruption thing that was going on with a trucking company within the church. So he went to jail for about 2 years. Okay, because of that. Kind of shameful, but it happened. But what happened was that I got a membership to a gym. I used to work out all the time when I was doing the Home Shopping Network thing. And I go to a gym and I signed up. It was a brand new gym and I'm working out. And he comes up. Hey, Tony, how you doing? I haven't seen you in a while, man. What's going on? He goes, man, I got a lot to tell you. You know what I mean? We start talking and then he says, hey, let me ask you a question. Have you ever heard of something called Torah? And I remember what I was doing. I was doing the lat pull downs and stuff. I says, yes, you know about that? And he goes, yeah, man, I've been doing it for a while. And because he went to jail and there he found the Torah. And then he came out and we started getting together every day. I will go to his house and we spend hours going over basic stuff and things like that.
Wow.
And by the way, that gym closed about a week after. They went bankrupt. They only lasted for about less than 2 weeks. What are the odds, right? So he redirected me to all the main teachers at that time, like in the late 90s and early 2000s. There were a lot of good teachers. And he redirected me to those people. And then I began to listen and learn and be more disciple by them not directly, but through teachings. And that's really my journey when it comes to this. As if I'd never met Tony Puleo, probably I would have never known more about the Torah. And I was reading the Torah because God led me to that church service that the pastor didn't want the Torah. You see how everything moves? So little by little, he began to connect me with people that would help me. So I spent by myself about a year, the whole 99 by myself. And Tony told me, yo, you got to fellowship with people, So he told me about a congregation in Brandon, Florida. And I just went to their Bible study. They used to have Bible classes every Monday night. They had a community Bible study. It was really peculiar the way they did it. I learned more that whole year. It's incredible. Year 2000 was amazing. I learned a lot. So they would 80, 100 people. They would go in there to study the Torah. That was back in the day. They would rent a hotel, ballroom, and people would come from all over Tampa to go study there in their congregation. And it was mediated properly. You will go in and you read a chapter. They got readers. You read the chapter. And then the person reading have 5 minutes to read about what they found. And then they will go around with the mic, but it was limited to how much time you can do it. You can go there random, speaking 5 minutes. I learned so much that year because I used to stay all day Sunday studying. I worked so in my job, I could be free on Sundays. So therefore, I would spend all day studying. I would get there early and I will sign my name to a chapter. But then I learned because when you come in and you start teaching something, but you have all the people who are very knowledgeable around you more than you when you're starting out, they start saying things that you didn't think about. So I will take notes. And I go back the whole week and I go back over it. So that was the process. And then I got invited to a youth camp, 2005. Then out of that, I was invited to a Sukkot. And from that Sukkot in 2005 until now, I've been to 38 countries. and the Lord has opened the gates for me to travel and to teach. Currently, I have a Spanish ministry, as well as an English ministry in English. And I've gone to all kinds of places all over the world. I'm grateful. That's a little bit of my testimony, man.
This episode of the Life Podcast is sponsored by WholeBibleCommunity.com, a social network for Torah observers. It's for fellowships, it's for individuals, it's for businesses. The idea is to connect them all, give them a place to communicate on the platform. There's a messaging app. There is soon a video communication app. And one of the new features that has been added is a feast day finder. So you can go on there and find public feast days that are being celebrated. Passover, Sukkot, unleavened bread, all these things where a fellowship or people are hosting something and they're inviting everyone to come. It is made to connect you and also protect you. That's why you don't have to share all your personal details on there. And some new features that Matthew has added, because he heard some of your feedback, is that you can now sign up and you can, instead of just putting in your address or having your location data being turned on, you can just choose a place on the map, anywhere of where you want to put yourself, so that you can be protected and your location can be protected. And then if you're a fellowship, you can, of course, put it right on your third-party location where you meet so that people can, find it. But for individuals, you can put the pin wherever you want, get past that step, sign up, and find people who are doing the same thing you're doing. Soon there will be this business marketplace where you can find businesses to work with. So the team is constantly working away and they're really improving this. Go to WholeBibleCommunity.com and sign up. Add me as a friend. Wow, so can you talk about that feeling, this resonance that you got when you looked at that Torah for the first time? It's like you knew it before you saw it or something. It's very interesting.
It was special. It was special. I felt that it's as if the letters jumped at me. Remember, I've been asking for the heart of God. That was my prayer. I will pray that. I want the heart of David. I want to know God. That was my whole thing. It wasn't until 2001 that I went to a conference and I purchased a book. And in the foreword of the book, it talked about the motivation of the writer, and it says, and as you know, the Torah is the heart of God, and it talks about how the bet in the first verse, Bereshit, the beginning, and then the last word of the book of Deuteronomy is Israel. The last letter is a lamed, it's an L. So when you put the L and the bet together, it's heart. So you can only imagine how excited I was and how overwhelmed I was, even 2 years after my beginnings, that my request was granted. I kept bugging him, please show me your heart. I want to know your ways. And there I find out that what he showed me was his heart. So that's why I'm passionate. That's why I'm grateful. And I'll go anywhere to teach about his words, because it is the heart of God. So think about it. God has gifted us his heart, the Torah.
Wow. I love that. And it's so sad that this isn't just at this point yet common knowledge. I mean, it is growing. It seems like more people are learning this. But do you have any thoughts about that? About the fact that this isn't mainstream knowledge yet? Oh, sorry.
I think, you bring a really good point, and I don't know why. I mean, I'm in conversations with a pastor in North Carolina that we're becoming friends, and he's invited me to his congregation. This is going to be a third year in a row. So in one of my teachings that I would love for the audience to consider is on YouTube and on my website, it's talking about how Yeshua is Messiah by understanding the temple service. And he liked the video. So then he says, hey, tell me about the different levels of transgression of the Bible. So I prepared something for him, and he started teaching it to his congregation. So I think it's the way we can influence the system of religion to understand where we're coming from, instead of the way we used to do it, trying to bash every second. Just because something is wrong doesn't necessarily mean that the intention is not wanting to do it right. But I think sometimes we become self-righteous. And I know, as a personal testimony, I could attest to that. For a little while, I was part of the problem. And not because that was my intent, it's my zeal for God. But that's why I got myself a teacher, to be directed in the path of order and foundational teachings. Unfortunately, today, sad to say, the whole movement as a whole is very fragmented. And it's also, there's no structure. And also, crazy topics, man. I mean, why would the church want to embrace something there's no structure? And then the topics, they go from one thing to way over here. And it's like, wait a minute, they can't even get it together themselves. And that, by the way, this is the reason why I remove myself from labels. In the group that I have, we just call ourselves Disciples of the Way. We are returning to the first century model of study. We're liturgical. We like the Torah. We don't reject Jewish writings. We study them like I do scholarly work to get a better understanding of the overall context of the Bible from the Jewish perspective, as well as from scholarly, importantly for the Bible. I mean, the Bible is not written to us. It was written for us, right? So when you understand that the Bible is not written directly to you, but you are a participant and the beneficiary of the great blessings that God gave to the people that it was written to, then you realize quickly that we lack the proper foundational understanding of what we're reading. And I believe that's the problem. That's the disconnection. We are trying to apply our wounds, our past behaviors, our denominationalism perspective and dogmas to a brand new text that was written in a different geographical location, in a different language, to a different ethnos, and we try to apply it to us today, and we argue about how it's applicable, but we never bother to go to the time frame when it was written. No wonder we have so many subgroups within the Torah community that we have today. We're hoping that we can change that by showing foundational information. That's really what I'm trying to do. Instead of pointing out the problems, I'm trying to find a niche where we can build so that we can have some kind of cohesiveness and at least grow together, even in our differences. As long as our foundations are solid, we can still have different interpretations about certain things that are not salvation issues. And that'll be okay.
Do you think that could be possible at some point? This kind of just helping the Torah group gel or get along, or I don't know what. Be
Well,
normal?
first of all, yeah, I hear you, man. I mean, this is a challenge for me. I mean, imagine how I feel trying to do this almost three decades, and I'm still struggling trying to communicate with certain people because unfortunately they don't want to listen. You got to remember, I've been forced to recognize that I needed a teacher. Remember, I was a baseball player. Since 3 years old, I've been playing baseball. So I had a coach every year. Then I got to high school, I had a coach. I went to college, junior college, I had a coach. I went to San Francisco State, I had a coach. The moment I went to minor league baseball, I had a coach. As a baseball scout, I had a coach. So now we come to the Torah and we don't learn from anybody. It's just illogical. And the problem is that we don't know the people are learning from. They don't know their parent. They don't know their family. We listen to someone on the internet that sounds logical and sounds the way we like to hear it, but you don't know if there's a good father, a good husband. You don't know their testimony. You don't know what kind of person they are. That doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything, but they have to get some kind of integrity and honor, you know? You know what I learned today? I'm going over a book that I read a few years back. Actually, I read it like 11 years ago. Transformed my life, okay? It's called Righteousness and Justice in the Ancient Near East and in Israel by Moshe Wainfeld. It's actually a reading requirement with any of my students around the world. If they want to study with me, that's the first book I give them. Other than the Bible, obviously, you know, because it talks about righteousness and justice, now the way the New Testament. Actually, yes, but indirectly showing you how the ancient world did it. And something I'm reviewing all the book. I'm reading it again. I was talking to Mike this past weekend, and I recommended the book, and I was reviewing it myself because I like the topic. Something so simple: when a king will make a declaration of freedom, permanent freedom, there are some steps that he had to take, so that the audience or the people who are captives Like, for example, Israel and Babylon, when King Cyrus made the proclamation in the book of Ezra of the permanent freedom of Israel, sending them back to Egypt, to Israel. He gave them money. He gave them. He told them, go back and build your temple, restore your people. Right? That was practiced throughout the ancient world. When a new king was enthroned, there was acts of righteousness and justice. So how did you know that you were free? Because remember, there were a lot of Jews in the Babylonian captivities all over the empire, and the empire was quite vast. Well, what they would do, they would send a messenger, a royal messenger, who came directly from the king, and in voice and writing, he will proclaim what the king decreed to give you that permanent freedom. So the signs were release prisoners, cancellation of debt, giving them money to go back in safety and rebuild their temples and their cities. So, but yet, okay, so now you have the letter that the king signed as a decree that no one can change. Once the king makes a decree, not even the king can change it. And you see that in the story of Esther, that they have to write another decree in order to fight against Haman, right? Well, what's interesting is, how would you know, if you don't have Instagram and Facebook, that you have permanent freedom? Well, they used to send to the cities that they gave their freedoms. They used to have a stick with a torch on top of it. And once they read the document, they will plant that stick in front of the city gate where they were free of taxes. Interesting. Because Hebrews tells us that the light of the world, Yeshua, was taken outside the gate, and he died on a tree. And he died in the area where it's free of taxes that belong to the temple proper. And he actually says, when he's lifted up, Isaiah talks about the banner being lifted up for the nations. That banner-ness is exactly the proclamation of freedom they used to do in the ancient Near East. The message is clear. Yeshua becomes the vehicle, the inaugurator of this covenant to release humanity from death. The death of Yeshua is the proclamation that God gives us. His death and his resurrection now means you are free from the only thing the temple cannot solve and no other gods can solve: death. Only God can render a pardon for death. Therefore, the resurrection is God would justify the righteous. And because God has power over life and death. I think that message will resonate in the church. But we're not presenting that message. All we're doing is beating them up over the head the way I was beat up over the head that led me away from hearing about God. And in the beginning of my ministry, I was making the same mistake. And that's why I went back to college. I got myself teachers. And I'm trying to do my best to present the information in a different way without compromising the values. So it's a different journey, but, want to be loyal to God above else.
When did you realize that this was not the right way to approach the greater Christian world? Like beating them with the Bible and being like, how come you don't know the Torah?
It's easy to do. And even to this day, I have to be careful. I guess it was because there was an event that happened about, I think, 10 years ago now. I'm not going to mention the event, but I was a little bit upset about what was going on. If someone did something mainstream that, created havoc for the Torah community. And I wanted to share my thoughts on it biblically. And my wife made a statement. She goes, you can teach what you need to teach without saying it. And then she also said on another occasion, two things that she said to me that kind of made me realize somebody did something and I really hammered down on that person. I was right. But then when I get in the car, my wife's looking at me like, just because you're right doesn't mean you're right, And I'm going like, what in the world does that mean? Basically she was right. Just because I was right in something doesn't mean that the method that I was using will convey what I was trying to say. And I think in our zeal, and being on both sides, I can tell you that every person who follows Torah that's doing this, by and large, is because of their desire to get this person to, don't you see it, bro? Don't you see it? It's right here in front of you. You know what I mean? But what I did, it came because I visited a congregation in Monroe, Louisiana. Is it Louisiana or Missouri? I can't remember. Monroe, Louisiana?
I think so.
I got to remember where it is. I forgot the state. So it was a church, but I didn't know it was a regular church. So when they invited me and I show up, they have no knowledge whatsoever. And as I'm waiting to speak, I'm thinking, man, what am I going to do? They have no idea. They don't know who I am. The pastor invited me. He knew who I was, but he hasn't really prepared them. So what I decided to do was, why don't I talk about a few topics in the New Testament that requires context of the temple, of the culture, of the language, to get them to intrigue to know more. So I started with this one. I said, hey, have you guys ever heard about the cock crow in the Bible? Oh, yeah, cock crow. And then I said to them, did you know there were no chickens in Jerusalem in the first century? They were not allowed inside the city walls. They were like, what? So the next question was, so what is a cock crow? Now we can exchange. Then I began to propose to them where it came from. They accepted it. And I only taught for an hour based on 4 examples in the New Testament that when you read it, you don't think that it requires context behind it. So it lends itself to an education, a bilateral relationship. I'm showing you something in the New Testament that you believe, but yet no one told you its context. And then they're going like, oh, tell us more. Then I came back on Saturday. I did more. And then on Sunday, they requested a stay. So I learned from that experience that I could have all this information here that it is true. But if I don't present it in a way that would edify you, and you don't know anything about it, but I start with bashing you for something that you don't know, it's going to create a divide. Let me give you this last example that happened to me in Chihuahua, Mexico. Yeah, Chihuahua. I think it was that. And there was a guy who came in. I was doing a temple course that weekend. And he showed up, and just by the way he dresses, by the way he talks, I already knew who was his teacher. Okay? After a while, you know, it's their demeanor. And he's telling me, well, you know, my wife is just pagan. And I'm going, oh, he's calling your wife a pagan. You're not going to be, I told her, you're not going to have a wife very long, bro. And well, she just doesn't want to hear, and she doesn't want to do this. And he says, well, she wants to come tomorrow anyway. And I go, oh, Lord, I don't want to get between marriages here. The teaching that I was going to do was to present biblically the birth of Yeshua without touching Christmas. So I didn't know that was their argument. Their argument was those things. But he told me, oh, she's coming tomorrow. Okay. And I told him, dude, be patient with your wife, man. I mean, you can't expect her to, just like a lot of women, they come to the Torah and they expect their husbands to get it right away. It's not fair for them to walk faster than you when they don't know where they're walking to. Give them a chance to find the light or something, you know? And so I asked the teaching, and I said, guys, I want to present my thesis. Oh, on that time, I said my proposal, my teaching on when the birth of Yeshua was. Everyone argues about December, Christmas, and this. It's the only time I mention Christmas. But I would like to show you biblically how the Bible supports the time frame, not the day specifically, the time frame when that he would have been born. And because the moment you mention Christmas, you're dealing and you're fighting with emotions. But if you keep it biblically and you show that it was not on that day, then the person has a better opportunity to measure the evidence, not the emotion. That's something that I found. When you try to go against something that is an emotional attachment, you're going to have a huge challenge. But when you present that person the evidence, and then they're going to say, well, what's keeping me doing something here is emotion, is not truth. Then the person has to make the choice, not me. Okay, so I did the teaching. Afterwards, she's coming to approach me. And I'm going like, oh, Lord. And she goes, I want to thank you. Never forgot that, because it was a great catalyst to the way I'm presenting things now. She goes, thank you. All I wanted was to understand, but my husband kept beating me up with it. I just wanted to know so I can make a better choice. And that was a huge learning experience for me. And that's why I'm more, if you want to call it academic, but a lot of my presentations are moving more to academic approach without devoid of spirit. I don't want to take the spirit of God away, but sometimes people focus so much on the spirit, they leave the truth out. And we have to make sure it's together. So what I want to do is educate the audience to the best of my ability so that we can learn and understand, so then we can walk. So that's just one of those examples.
That's great. That is brilliant, man. Good.
I'm learning, man. I'm learning,
I'm super curious to hear that presentation now. Okay, now let's say I've heard a lot of talk about the difference between Greek and Hebrew mindset. The reason I'm bringing this up is because that's kind of what we're talking about the church. How can they understand this whole Torah download? If you could just tell a few things, 3 or 4 things to a believer, a mainstream Christian, to kind of pique their interest and help them on their way in studying, what would you tell them? Would that Greek and Hebrew thing be part of it? What would you say just to help guide them?
Actually, we were told Hebrew, Greek context. That's partly true. But we forget that the New Testament was written, by and large, a lot of the letters came in a Greco-Roman world.
True.
And Paul is speaking to a Greco-Roman world. They're Jewish people, obviously, but by and large, to a Greco-Roman people. So I think what we're lacking, and I was lacking like 17 years ago, is its cultural background. So this is the reason why 2 years in a row, I went to Turkey for the 7 churches of Revelation. I went to North Greece. I went to Kabbalah, which is an ancient city there. It's a port city today. And then I went to Philippi. I went to Amphipolis. I went to Thessaloniki, Thessalonians, where Thessalonians was written. I went to Athens and Corinth. Then I ended up in Rome. So when I went to those places and I was able to see the geography, topography, then I was able to understand Paul better, because he was really in a real world with Greek rhetoric he was using was very high level. People don't realize that. When you go to Athens and you start comparing where they were, how they live, and what they use, when Paul would speak, and you get all this Greek interested in his message, he was using Greek rhetoric. He was using high level of understanding that the Greeks knew, and he was saying that's what Torah is. Not Greek stuff, not Greco-Roman pagan stuff, but he's using the thought process to convey the message of the Torah. Well, the same is true in the ancient Near East. Let me give you an example. How many people study Egyptology? Hardly anybody within the movement, but yet they read the whole book of Exodus and they study the Torah portions. But yet it occurred in Egypt. They were in Egypt 210 years. Let me give you a few other examples. The whole book of Genesis is written in the ancient Near Eastern perspective, right? But they don't study Mesopotamian history, the ancient Near East. Okay, let me give you another example. They study, Israel, specifically in the Hebrew roots. This is what always comes out. Come out of Babylon. Come out of Babylon. Well, what does Babylon and Rome have in common? They destroy the temple, and they cause the dispersion of Israel. But yet, you talk about Babylon, but not you, but people talk about Babylon, but they never study Babylonian history, topography, geography. Where was Ezekiel by the river of Babylon? What was he looking at? He's looking at the hanging gardens, and he's looking at the ziggurat, the huge temples, and the beautiful city. And now he's contrasting, and then God reveals to him his city and his garden. What a contrast! We talk about the Maccabees, and people argue all the time. They don't study the Hellenization period and the Greco-Roman world. So how can we understand the Bible if we're not tapping into its cultural context? You can read all the Hebrew you want and the Greek, but until you understand it in its cultural background, It's going to be devoid of context. Can I give you an example of that?
Yeah.
If we go to the book of Revelation, right? Actually, no. Let's go to Galatians, Acts. I think it's 17. We're going to take the example of when he went to Thessaloniki, right? Thessalonians. And there's a big problem there, actually. He passed, chapter 17, verse 1. After Paul and Silas passed through Amphipolis and Apollonia. Apollonia is called Kabbalah today. It's a port city. Paul went there. It's kind of cool because I was able to look at it and going like, man, what was the original name of this town? It wasn't until the second year that I knew it was actually Apollonia, right? They came to Thessalonica. Took me through 2.5 hours drive through one particular road. I was able to see that one road that Paul walked into. It takes like 2.5 hours drive. It would take him like 3 days, journey, right? And it says, Paul went in into the Jewish synagogue as his custom was, and on 3 Sabbath day he argued from scriptures, watch, explaining and proving that it was necessary for Messiah to suffer and to raise from the dead, saying, this is the Messiah, Yeshua, whom I proclaim to you. Now, watch this. Some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, and did as many devout Greeks, and not a few of the leading women, but Jews became jealous, and with the help of some bad guys, ruffians here, says, in the marketplace, they formed a mob, and they set the city in an uproar while they were still searching for Paul and Silas to bring them to the assembly. They attacked Jason's house. I want you to pay attention what it's going to say, because it's very significant. The Greek text doesn't explain it. Culturally, it explains the Greek text. I don't hope that makes sense. And it says, the people who have been turning the world upside down have come here also, and Jason has entertained them as guests. They are all acting contrary to the decrees of the emperor, saying that there is another king named Jesus. So what did they do? So I wish I had 2 hours. But Paul goes in and tells them the Messiah, the anointed one, the Lord, Kyrios. And in the first century, the word Kyrios, Lord, was also alluding the emperor. That was the title of the emperor. Okay? So basically, Paul is teaching an anti-imperial message, a conflict of kingdoms. Okay? Now, what's interesting is the Jews could not judge cases based on the theological positions of the Torah. That's one of the exemptions that the Rome gave the Jewish people. Exemption from the military, from partaking in imperial worship, all those things. And one of them was, you can meet in your synagogue, and if you have issues with your law, leave us alone. You deal with it. As long as it doesn't break Roman law, we're good. Okay. And because the Jews understood they could not hold anything against Paul based on Torah, they use people at the marketplace who were Gentiles saying, hey, these guys are teaching there's another king. Well, wait a minute. The decrees of Rome were actually oath-taking, and Israel did this, by the way. And if you read Deuteronomy 13, then you'll understand what this means. The decrees of Rome was that when a colony or a community come under the sovereignty of Rome, they have a communal oath of allegiance and loyalty to the emperor. Anyone who will come in, enticing you to leave that emperor for somebody else, it will consider as treason. And that's the context here. So you can read the Greek and the Hebrew, but consider adding its cultural background and the outlining understanding of the culture to facilitate a more broad perspective of the narrative instead of just the Hebrew text and the Greek text. A Greek text can mean 3 or 4 things. So which one fits? So that's just one example. I appreciate you giving me the time to talk.
Oh, no problem. It's great. I think people will love hearing this.
It's just the way that I teach, is trying to give you a narrative behind the narrative. And I think that's important. You asked for a few examples. I give you this last one. All of us believe in resurrection. That's the foundation of our faith. Without resurrection, we are all wasting time, just like Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15. So where is where is a one verse in the 5 books of Moses that literally says that when we die, we're going to be resurrected? Where is the message of resurrection where it literally says you're going to resurrect? It's a good question. When you read the letters of Paul, says he will go to a synagogue and he will show the death, burial, and resurrection of Messiah in the scripture and the prophets. So where is that in the 5 books of Moses? You can read the Hebrew text, but if you do not understand the culture and the message behind the message, you're not going to see it. Because remember, the Bible was written to the audience at that time frame. It's for us to understand the themes and the motifs. But to them, it would have made sense because they were surrounded and permeated in the culture, and the contrast would have been significant. It's us that we don't understand their time frame. That's why we don't see it. It's a valid question.
I'm curious what it is, what the verse is. I wish I had it off the top of my head.
Genesis 1:1, everyone focuses on that, as I did for a long time. The beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was empty and void. But if you read in this version, it gives you, this is the NRSV, UE, it's a good translation, very respected in the scholarly world. And when you go to verse 1, I like this reading. It says, when God began to create the heavens and the earth was completely chaos, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Seems redundant that it has to say that the Spirit of God hovered over the waters of the sea. He is already established. He created the heavens and the earth. So why do we need to know that the waters were hovering over the waters of the sea? Which, by the way, if you understand the motif of this, then you know why Jesus walked on water. What was the message behind him walking on water? You'll understand why Jonah asked to be thrown in the water. You'll understand why God told Israel to go through the Red Sea and walk between the waters. Then you'll understand why they have to cross the River Jordan. Then you'll know why you need to be immersed. You see, water, the sea, was considered chaos in the time when the Bible was written. It was the Canaanites believe it was the way to the underworld where Mot, death, dwelled, the big fish, Rahab, Leviathan, the serpent, the dragon. All those things are synonymous. It's one thing. So they believed, all did, Mesopotamian, in the Marduk Tiamat, Egyptians, motif, Canaanite, Baal versus Mot. They all believed that whoever defeated the sea, Yam, was considered to be king of creation. So to us today, the Spirit of God hovered over the waters of the sea. But to someone reading the Torah who was not an Israelite, and they read that, they say, it is the God of Israel who controls chaos. Thus, he is the king of the universe. See, the message is what we teach, but we can't prove it from Genesis 1:1 because we're not understanding its cultural background. And that's just one example. If you want to know more, consider going onto my website or YouTube, wisdomandtorah.com, and I do teach on these topics.
I think a lot of people are going to because there's so many. They're going to be so curious about all of this.
Yeah. It's like the woman, the prostitute Rahab, right?
Yeah.
The story of Jericho. They cross the River Jordan, and they don't come out to fight. But why? They had one of the oldest, kingdoms, and they had strong walls and everything. Why didn't that? How come they didn't come out to fight? And then when the spies asked Rahab, which happens to be, coinkydinky, happens to be one of the names of the underworld god, and she's a prostitute, and they ask her, what do you do this for us? We heard that your God controls the sea. Let me get this straight. This woman who's a prostitute is willing to hide 2 Israelites, enemies, in her house, knowing that if they catch her, not only is she dead, her family is dead, and brings more dishonor just because the people walked through the Red Sea? So the question you have to ask, what did the Red Sea represent of walking through the water to the ancient world? See, but we have to ask those questions. And that's what I do in my studies. I try to ask these questions to try to put myself in your shoes. It's like, well, you read that and people go around and say, well, I don't get it. Well, that's resurrection message. For example, the whole Red Sea thing, right? You know, Red Sea is not really the right translation. It says Sea of Reeds. So if you read the Book of the Dead, I have it somewhere in here. If you read the Book of the Dead, you know that in the Egyptian motif, when you died, they weighed your heart. It's called the weighing of the heart. And in the last few weeks, Torah portions, we hear that God hardened the heart of Pharaoh. Well, they believe that when you die, they take your heart and they weigh it against the feather of Ma'at. Ma'at was the cosmological balance, giving stability to the cosmos. And the Pharaoh was supposed to maintain Ma'at, balance. So you were weighed in a balance. The destroyer is over here as a half dog and half taninim of the alligator. Then you have Osiris leading the person who's dressed in white to a weighing of the heart. If your heart was lighter than the feather, then you were righteous. You go into the kingdom. But if your heart is hardened, meaning that it weighs more than the feather, you're being judged by the gods. So therefore, when God says, and I will harden the heart of Pharaoh, any Egyptian would have understood that it's not the gods of Egypt who judges him, is the God of the people he has oppressed. All of a sudden now everything makes more sense. So when you read the Book of the Dead, they believe the way they used to get to their garden, to their understanding of the netherworld, to them, right? So you will go on a ship, and then if you went beyond the reeds, then that was garden. Think about that. Then God says, hey, Moses, make a left turn, make a right turn, go straight, there's a sea, chaos. And you're going to be Pihahiroth, the mouth of gorgeous. There's no escape. And then you're going to be overlooking Migdal, a tower. Oh, overlooking Baal Zephon. Baal Zephon was a temple built to Baal because they believed that Baal destroyed the underworld, destroyed Mot, right? So therefore, they built him a temple to commemorate his victory over creation. So now God says, I need you to cross the sea. Now, I want you to notice, every Israelite was scared out of their minds, but none of the Egyptians were scared. How come the narrative doesn't say that the Egyptians were scared? They're just waiting for the pillar to move out of the way so they can go. But every Israelite were afraid. And then you notice that on the other side of the Red Sea, the Sea of Reeds, God is enthroned as King and Savior. And then you have the theophany at Mount Sinai, enthronement ceremony. That's the heaven where God reveals himself to his people. Again, ancient Near Eastern culture now allows you to make a contrast behind the resurrection message of the Bible compared to the way they believed. And it's still the same today.
I want to ask more about what you've said, but can we get a little bit into why you studied the temple and then maybe your thoughts about that and the future temple, if you have time?
What aspect of the temple you want to talk about?
What first made you curious about even studying it?
Believe it or not, it was like before I came to the Lord, I put my son, when he was going to a regular school, I put him in a Baptist school. It was before I was following Torah and anything. It was like 1995 or 6, I can't remember. He was going, 97 when I came back from Venezuela. He was going to a Christian school. And he comes home one day and says, hey, Papi, did you know that the tabernacle had this and the tabernacle had that? They were teaching him the tabernacle in the school. I had no idea. And I felt so embarrassed. My kid knew about the tabernacle. I grew up in a church and I had no clue. And so what I did, I purchased like one of the little models, and I began to build it, start building it yourself. And you follow the model of Exodus and you're trying to follow it and, try to build it. And that was basically the beginnings of my interest. The only Christian teacher I would listen to for the 12 years I was in the world was Perry Stone. The only guy that would. It's interesting because I was 12 years running around, but when Perry Stone would come on back then, I would listen to him. And he was teaching the Hebraic understanding of the Bible. Okay? And he did a study that I still had the VHS for somewhere hanging around about the tabernacle a long time, 90s. That's when my son was born, 91. And I bought it. But you got to think about it. I'm not living the life, but I bought it. It always intrigued me. When I came back to the things of God, I wanted to know the heart of the Lord. My desire was kind of simple. What is the closest I could get to Him? I just wanted to learn how to get close to the Lord. And I found that His presence dwelled in a temple. So what it did was it was teaching me the blueprint how to approach God. And that's why the word korban is used for sacrifice. When the audience, by and large, when you hear the word sacrifice, you think death. But in Hebrew, the word korban doesn't mean death. It means to draw near. So in my desire to get close to the Lord, I found that the blueprint of a relationship, understanding how to approach God, in how you speak to Him, in how you address Him, and how you come forward with an offering. Today we don't have a temple, but we are as a living offering today. We want to come near the Lord. So my desire was based on not being worthy, but yet finding the way to be near. And I just had this long-term goal. I want to learn as much as I can on the temple. And remember that I told you originally that I wanted to make a difference, that I want to live longer for God than I did for the world. So my whole intent and my only desire was to learn everything I could on the temple so that when the time will come, if I needed to direct someone in the right path, I would help them. Not pretend to be in the temple, to do services. No. Just to sit down and somebody comes into the area. You know, when you visit somewhere new, you don't know where you're at, and someone is really kind. No, don't go that way. Come on over here. I want to help you. Well, that was really what I was thinking. You know, it's like, no, don't do that. But what kind of animal you have? What kind of offering? That's not the one you're supposed. I mean, that was my mindset, really innocently, and just trying to help people. And that's what led me into the study of the temple. But I was limited in my understanding until 2009. That's when I got together with Joseph Good. Now, Joseph Good has been my temple teacher for the last, 2000, and I called him in 2010. But I was learning from him indirectly, just watching videos and stuff. But eventually I called him and says, I want to be your student and start from scratch because I wanted to learn how to approach God. That's really the whole intent. Then I studied the book of Leviticus with Jacob Milgram, one of the leading scholars on the book of Leviticus, because I was doing ancient Near Eastern research, and he was studying purity laws, moral and ritual laws, contrasting them to the ancient Near East, which Orthodox Jews don't do. So I began to read his work, and man, it's incredible, not knowing that he's the leading authority on it in the academic world, even to this day. And that really woke a huge desire, because then I knew that, like an example, how come women are not allowed to go beyond a threshold in the temple? When you talk to women in the 21st century here in America, they have a problem with that text. Well, why how come we can go in? You know? And I realized that when you contrast ancient Near Eastern history, the Canaanites and the other cultures, they practice fertility rituals. Okay? And at one point or another, in certain places, there was temple prostitution. The book of Ezekiel talks about this. So God requires of the women in Israel to be virgins and not to go beyond a threshold. Why? Because God doesn't want the women to be perceived by the nations that they're temple prostitutes. There's a threshold to protect their honor. That's the reason. It's not because God doesn't want you there. Plus, what happens if you have your menstrual cycle? You can't go into that area where there's a shedding of the blood like that. And by the way, one thing connects to something else. This is the reason why the commandment for going up to Jerusalem for the feast is mandated only to the males, not the women. Now, it doesn't mean that the women should not go up. Obviously, they would. But remember, God created them with function to have their menstrual cycle. And that's not acceptable in that condition to go into the temple. Now, imagine if there's a commandment for every Israelite, men and women, to go to the temple during the high holidays, and a woman falls into her menstrual cycle. Now she has a quandary. What do? I can't go because of purity laws, but it's a commandment. Well, the beauty of the Torah, God understands their function and their purpose and their role. So there says, you're not mandated to go to the temple during the high holidays, because you may fall into your menstrual cycle. And he's protecting you. So these are the things that I'm studying about Leviticus and the temple that is making me fall in love with God, because he is righteous and he is good and he is holy. But then if we don't understand that, we're going to assume that God is just making a distinction between men and women. That's not the case. And that's only one of the examples that drives me to understand Leviticus, so we can understand better.
Man, that's another great one. And I'm sure that's a question that some of the people watching will have had. Okay, how about let's look at modern day now. What do you
Yes, sir.
think about this idea that the Temple Institute has to build a third, and others, to build a third temple? What are your thoughts about it? Do you think it'll happen? Do you think we should run away, or should we go there, or all of this?
Well, I would ask, that's a very good question, by the way, and I would ask the audience this question. According to Galatians chapter 3, verse 20 and 21, and also Acts chapter 13, verse 36 to 39, what is the only thing that the temple cannot justify us from? What is the only thing that there was no offering, there was no sacrifice for in the temple? This has been my thesis, by the way, when I go back to college for my doctorate, is going to be this topic. See, people talk about against the temple, but they don't realize, and I want you to be honest with the audience. Please be honest with me. How come there's not one shred of evidence that Yeshua, 40 days after he resurrects, 40 days he spends with disciples, correct?
Yeah.
He never said anything against the temple. He never said anything against the sacrifices. He never said anything against the priesthood. He never said anything against the office of the high priest. He was against the corruption, but not against the office. Two different things altogether. Now, Paul, James, Peter, none of the disciples ever for 40 years mention anything against the temple. On the other hand, we have Acts chapter 3, verse 1. John and Peter going up to the temple at the hour of prayer, where they were slaughtering a lamb. This happened after the resurrection of Yeshua. We see in chapter 6, 7, and 8, it tells us that the disciples were going to the temple to talk about Yeshua. Well, why were they going up to the temple? They were still doing offerings. Then we see in chapter 20, verse 16, where Paul was trying to hurry from Ephesus all the way to Jerusalem. And in chapter 21, he's observing Pentecost. Well, you cannot observe Pentecost if you don't do Passover. So, and you require offerings in Passover and in Pentecost. I mean, come on. So why is it that we have no objection from anyone in the first century writings against the temple and the offerings, but we only take the book of Hebrews that was written from Italy, chapter 13, the last two verses, and it was written in the context of Yom Kippur at the time of the destruction of the temple and the siege of Jerusalem. So now we have a presentation of Yeshua as a high priest in the year, somewhere around the year 66, 70, we're not quite sure when, or if it was during or immediately after the destruction of the temple. But there was never an objection by anybody about the sacrifices in the temple, because Yeshua did not come to do away with those things, because those things in the temple could not resolve the problem of death. It could only restore relationship. It could purify you. For example, if you touch a dead carcass, you cannot go to the temple, because remember, that's the realm of life. But in the temple, there was a ritual that was pointing to the future, in which if you touch something with corpse impurity, God says, don't worry, I still want to fellowship with you. You need to go through this ritual, the ashes of the red heifer and the waters of purification. Once you're purified, you can come in, but in a clean state. If you touch a carcass and you come in, that's the death penalty. Why? So that you would eliminate the possibility of the nations saying that in Israel they worship the underworld. No, you worship the God of life, not death. So that is actually pointing to the master plan of God and the redemptive plan of the Lord through the resurrection of Yeshua. The book of Hebrews now is giving you a thesis. He is saying, hey, what the temple could not do for you, God did by accepting the blood of Yeshua to purify everyone's conscience. And now you can come and present yourself before God because death no longer has reign over you. And by the way, that's exactly the way the book opens, chapter 2 of the book of Hebrews. Check this out. Too much?
No,
All right.
no.
Chapter 2. Chapter 2, verse 14 and 15. It tells you exactly the purpose of why Yeshua came. The thesis. It says, since therefore, verse 14, chapter 2, verse 14. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise share the same things, so that through death he may destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil, and free, watch this, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by the fear of death. The purpose of Yeshua's coming was not to do away with the temple service, was to do what the temple service cannot do for you, eliminate death. It can purify you, but it cannot do away with mortality. And that's why the message of the New Testament is about life from the dead, because God is the one that has the power to do so. The temple cannot resurrect anybody. The temple can only teach you how God will restore you. You know that ritual of the red heifer, the sprinkling?
Yeah.
It's actually a motif of resurrection. You are dead in your trespasses, and then when you get sprinkled, you come into the realm of life. A leper, he was also sprinkled, and he would put the blood and so from death to life, resurrection motif. It's all about resurrection. How would you know resurrection if you don't know what the temple's trying to tell you? So the temple's the blueprint of the things to come, because the things to come was to resolve the problem of humanity that the temple cannot solve, mortality. And the temple teaches you how to walk in God's realm of life. That's only one important example that we need to learn. Otherwise, if they do an offering, people say, oh, that's of the Antichrist. Guys, it was God who ordained the altar to be holy. Be careful. This is very serious. If you don't understand it, just study it first. Okay, so this is important that we do. And, these are topics that I cover in detail. Hopefully some of you will consider my website as a point of research to validate the information.
Do you think, and now, I guess separately, do you think there's a chance that the temple will be rebuilt?
I have a theory. It's only my own opinion here. You don't need the whole temple for the altar to function. People don't know that. They assumed, for example, when they came back from Babylon, the first thing they did, they fixed the altar. Once the altar is functioning, that's a temple. So let's say that I don't have an altar, but I have the buildings. It's not a temple. It's only a temple when you have the altar. Remember Moses in chapter 24 of the book of Exodus. They built an altar. There was no temple, and the tabernacle has not yet been set up. The altar was built, and Moses sprinkled the people towards the people and the altar, indexing a covenantal relationship between God and the people. That's why everything that touches the altar is holy, because it represents God's authority on the earth. That's why the great tribulation will begin when the false Messiah defiles the altar. That's why the altar was destroyed when Antiochus, he put a pig on the altar, defiling God's authority on the earth. When Noah came out of the ark, he built an altar to dedicate it to God. When Abraham entered the promised land, that was not his land yet, he built an altar to God. Isaac built an altar. Jacob built an altar. Israel built the altars. So therefore, my thesis, in my opinion, and by the way, my teacher's not in agreement with me, and we have cool conversations about this stuff because we're still trying to figure it out. I believe that they will begin with the altar, which takes 8 days. And this is the reason Hanukkah is celebrated with the 9 candles. Okay, 7 are the days of dedication. On the 8th, it becomes an official altar. You can see that in the book of Leviticus chapter 8 and 9. Okay, and then on the 9th light is the one that keeps the other ones lit. So Hanukkah is a celebration of the dedication of the altar. Once the altar is dedicated, if there's no other buildings, it's a temple. They're just going to be, now they're able to finish the other buildings. This is my opinion. I believe, and I may be wrong, okay, that they will dedicate the altar. Once they dedicate it as a temple, and they will continue to build the other buildings, but I don't think the false Messiah would allow for everything to finish. He will probably defile it. And this is my opinion. Do we have a precedent for this? Well, yeah. When they're remodeling the temples, the altar was still functioning while they're remodeling the building. So please understand that there's more than just, oh, the temple will be destroyed, or that's a temple of the Antichrist. Please do me a favor, take the time to research this. Because when you start talking against God's house, you're not no longer talking about theory. You're touching things that are holy to him. And unfortunately, in the Christian world, and even in our circles, there's a huge connection with temple language and temple studies. And I think it's kind of sad, because how can you understand Leviticus? And Leviticus is all about the holy things. Now think about this, bro. Some of the major arguments: calendars, the name, the priesthood, right? Leviticus. That's where it comes from. Feasts, Leviticus 23, right? Sacrifices, chapter 1 to chapter 7. Priesthood, chapter 8 and 9, including Exodus 28 and 29, right? And Numbers chapter 18. Oh, the firstborn blessing, Numbers chapter 3 tells you it's to the sons of Levi. It's all related back to the center of the book. And if I ask the audience, with all due respect to you, how much time do we dedicate to the book of Leviticus in our studies? Hardly anything. So therefore, being that that's the case, what I've decided to do was to commit myself in my personal journey as a teacher to research it for the next decade. I've been studying for a long time, but I want to dedicate from now to 70. Oh my God, 70, it's going to be soon. From 59 to 70, my main research is going to be Leviticus. And by the way, from there, you can talk about all kinds of stuff, because I see that there's a need within our ranks to at least reconcile certain things. So I am hoping that maybe I could be a vehicle to bring some light into that aspect on the studies, instead of me pushing my agenda, maybe highlight some things like I did with you, to hopefully propose a new perspective of something that normally people reject. And that's really what I'm trying to do.
Maybe one last question and I'll let you go.
Right, yeah, because I have to go. But yeah, definitely.
Oh, you only have a couple minutes, don't you? All right. Shoot, this one's a big one. But it might not be. Actually, it might be quick.
Okay.
So Yeshua says to the woman at the well, basically, in the future, people will worship in spirit and in truth. Not in the temple, but in spirit and truth. Is he just prophesying about the time where there won't be a temple? Basically,
I believe so. This is my opinion. I believe so. I mean, you got to remember, Yeshua was very much aware of the prophecy against about the destruction of the temple. It was very, very much known. Also, remember who the woman was. What was she from?
Right next door.
Yeah, Samaritan woman.
Yeah.
I mean, did you realize the history between Judea and the Samaritans? I mean, the fact that he's even talking to her was shocking. Because even the Jews to this day, they were saying that if you marry a Samaritan woman, it's have his menstrual impurity. I'm paraphrasing. I mean, they will not get along at all. So the fact that he's even talking to her, and he recognizes that he's the Messiah, it shows basically the whole purpose of serving God is temple is only the vehicle to teach you how to address God and how to come near the Lord. But as a nation, Israel is supposed to be a temple as a nation. So let me ask you a question. How can you be a temple and you don't know how the temple functions? He's giving you a blueprint so you know how to function as a temple. So again, the temple cannot save you. It can only guide you in what holiness is, the rules of how to engage God. That's really the whole motivation. And if you understand the dynamics and history between the Samaritans and the Judeans, then that story will make a lot of sense. It's just like the lepers. Yeshua said, now, go present yourself to the priest according to the law of Moses. Did you realize the chaos that would have caused? I mean, the Jews and the priests, they see Samaritans who had leprosy coming to Jerusalem to be cleansed when they don't believe Jerusalem was a place of authority. They never even read the prophets. They didn't care about, only read 5 books of Moses and Joshua. That's it. Even to this day. So now for them to go to Jerusalem is, you need to recognize that God's authority is from Jerusalem, not from Samaria. And the Jews need to realize that God is equitable and includes them in the message of redemption. And you have to accept them with the same ritual as anybody else. Talk about reconciliation. But you have to understand the dynamics. And I believe that's influential in how Yeshua is approaching the woman at the well. By the way, I was there at that well. I was there in November. I went to that well. I saw it right there. Still there. It's incredible.
I know there's so much more, but we got to let it go. Wisdomintorah.com, that's the best place to find you, right?
Yes, sir. Wisdomintorah.com. And I also have my YouTube channel, Wisdom in Torah Ministries. And hey, listen, I have a tour to Israel in November. Don't worry about the war right now. That'll end soon. And then we're going to have a great time in November. If you want to know more about what I'm teaching you, what I share here, come with me in November on the tour, okay? Go to wisdomintorahevents.com and give me the honor and the privilege to show you the land of the King. I think you will be blessed. Invest in your spiritual journey. And I will share some other stuff that I'm talking about here with you, but on site. And I guarantee you, your life will change because the land is good. It's very good. Thank you, man, for having me. I'm very honored. Thank you so much. I made it to your podcast.
Hey, it's a blast. It was a blast. We will link to all those things. And have a good one, sir.
And thank you. And I hope someday I'll be able to catch up with you again.
This podcast is also sponsored by the Life Network, or TLN, as I like to call it. You can check out what we're doing there at watchthelife.com. We're making a matchmaking show that hooks up Torah observant singles so that they can have a family. We're touring Torah observant homesteads so that you homesteaders can learn the best practices from the best people that we can find. We're hosting a women's talk show where Katie discusses common Torah problems, joys, issues, trials, tribulations, all on camera, all for your benefit. And we have more stuff coming. So if you want to find out more about that, go to watchthelife.com and join us, baby. We're revolutionizing entertainment, and we're doing it in a biblically clean way. This is Netflix for Torah. Go to watchthelife.com.